Hello, beautifuls. You're listening to Bliss and Grit. I'm Vanessa Scotto, and I'll be joined soon by my dear friend and co-host, Brooke Thomas. On this show, we're talking about being on the embodied spiritual path. And what does that really mean? What is a real evolution of our lives? How do we ultimately embrace everything? All the beauty and crazy, the joys and the messes, the bliss and the grit that is a human life. In this week's episode, we're talking all about energy. How can we experience energy within and around ourselves? Why is it important, or frankly, even interesting, to look at energy in relation to healing and wholeness? Could experiencing the subtle vibrational realms be the birthplace of our intuition? As Sensey people who've worked with energy throughout our careers and have dealt with it a lot in our lives, we've got a lot to say here about the vibrational reality of things. If you're enjoying the show, we'd be, of course, delighted if you left us a review on iTunes or on our Facebook page, which is Bliss and Grit. You can also head over to blissandgrit.com and subscribe to hear updates about upcoming events we have in the works. We are currently running our first virtual Sangha, and that's been super fun, and we're looking forward to meeting more of you. Also, just a note, we will be taking off the next 2 weeks after this, just because of many summer conflicting scheduling. So, we'll see you 2 weeks from now. Last note before we head into the conversation, you all probably know already, but just in case you're new, Brooke and I have potty mouths. So if there are kids around, please do feel free to pop in some headphones. Okay, here we go. Good morning, Brooke.
Good morning.
I feel extra energized today because I just got back from Iceland and I'm jet lagged. So I'm like, it's like noon right now.
Nice.
And I have so much to say, I feel like, about today's topic. Like, even as I was thinking about it before we jumped on the call, I already was getting that, like, duct buildup where, like, not everything can get through the funnel at the same time.
Totally.
So I'm going to try to keep the mania down. And today we're going to talk about energy. And I wanted to share a story. It's funny. I'm a Chinese medicine doctor. Some of you may know that. Brooke does. And I was working with energy, right? I mean, that's what Chinese medicine is. Like, you do acupuncture, you do herbs. It was working with the energetic being. But I always say, like, acupuncturists are always in the closet energy workers because we don't really, like, confess that we're working with energy. So even though I was, I guess, 24 at the time, and I was working with energy and, like, feeling how open everything got after I got acupuncture, I still was a little bit of a doubter. Let's just say doubter. So I was living in San Diego at the time, and I, like, roll into this spiritual bookstore, I don't know, somewhere in Del Mar. It was like North San Diego. And there's this woman giving free Reiki sessions. And I'm like, Reiki, so lame. Like, they don't even touch you, and there's no needles. Like, how could someone possibly do anything? But I'm like, okay, I'm going to give it a shot. It's free. It's 15 minutes. And I lay down on the table. And for those of you who don't have any familiarity with Reiki, it's like the practitioner will hold their hands over certain body parts, but they're not touching you. So the woman's, starting to hold her hands, and it feels pleasant. She's over my head. And all of a sudden she hits my ears, like her hands are over my ears. Clear as day, I hear my father screaming at me. Screaming at me. And I'm like, what the fuck? Like, it's like someone came into the room. Like, it was that startling. And I had never had an experience like that really at that age yet. And I'm like, whoa. And, as she went through different body parts, different things started to happen like that. And I was kind of astonished enough to go ahead and try another session with her, like a full session. This one was trippy because where I saw a past life. I saw legs. I was running. I was in the fields. And after the session was done, she was like, I saw a past life of yours. Do you want me to share it with you? I'm like, yeah, same.
Wow.
So that was when I first started to believe like, oh, maybe there's really something to this. I went on to study with this woman. She was actually quite a gifted woman. She had like her teacher, she was Swiss, and her teacher made her meditate like every day for 8 years before she could touch people or, do Reiki on people. So, but got me thinking about the topic of energy and really what is it and why is it important? And I guess maybe that question is like, why is the conversation essential if you're on the embodied spiritual path?
Yeah. Oh my God, same thing. I wish I could just immediately put all of the things I want to convey.
I know. Up
with
on like
simultaneity.
A whiteboard.
Yeah, like project it on a board. But I guess we'll just see whatever actually comes through. For me, I've been, particularly in this last year, even though I've been receiving energy work since I was 22, when I was at like the low point of my body story and my jaw was a mess. And I discovered it was one of those like, oh, there's this woman, a Barbara Brennan healer, who was down the street from, I was in college at the time, from my parents' house in Nowheresville, Massachusetts, Norfolk, Massachusetts. It's this town of like 1,700 people at that time. A Barbara Brennan energy healer was down the street from me. I have no idea how I genuinely cannot remember anything about how I found her. And same thing, very profound, my first experiences. And always when I get energy work, and it started from that very first session, tons of like super tranced out and also tons of visuals and input and things moving through. And yet, even though that was so long ago, somehow I've definitely been in the closet about it, that I believe in energy work. And just saying that phrase, I believe in energy work, conveys how much there was, until very recently, this divider. Like it's this woo-woo thing over there that's like extra. It's an add-on to normal human experience or something. But it's actually very much not woo-woo. And it's like the most tangible thing in the world. And that's where I've been coming to this year through work with Kieran Trace, our teacher, and through our work with Judith Blackstone. And so last week's episode, we aired my interview that I did on Liberated Body with Judith. And you can hear in that conversation some of how Judith talks about energy, like the not lump thing, so there's this basic scientific understanding that we all have that at some point sounded crazy to people, right? Before there were microscopes and ways to look at much, much magnified, self, before we understood that we were made up of cells and that cells were made up of and all these smaller pieces. And then within these pieces, they weren't lumps. There is a lot of space. There's a ton of spaciousness in a being. And we're just this vibrating energy. We know that that's true because we have the ability to look at that level with tools. And yet we all all matter appears as solid lumps, but we know it's not made up of solid lumps. But then to be able to experience that and to be able to experience it in a way that is healing, of course, brings in this whole other level. I don't know. I'm thinking maybe we read the Judith lump quote. It's not a lump quote, but the solidness quote.
Your word or her word? I think that might have
because
been
then we can kind of riff on that. Yeah, that's
I feel lumpy. Okay. And yes, as just to add to what you were saying about the cells, it's like, duh, we're electromagnetic, right?
Right.
Like
we're
the body
actually
is electric.
Just energy and form. It's the whole.
But the energy makes up the form.
Right,
and
exactly.
It makes the
we
form
know that.
Go.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's just having an experience of it, of course, is wildly different than cognitively knowing it and scientifically knowing it.
Yes, of course. And it makes me think, just to add here, what Kieran Trace had said to us in one of the classes we took with her, which is just like, I don't know, maybe I just heard it at the right time because it's so simple. It's astonishing. But she was like, don't overcomplicate it. Energy is that tingling in your hands. It's energy.
Yeah. Kieran has been revelatory for me for making energy work incredibly practical and just, those sensations you feel in your solar plexus when you get nervous. And then if you can bring attention to them and you get a little more spacious in there and it shifts, you're doing energy work on yourself. It's not complicated, you know?
Right. Okay. More on that. Let's get more on that. I'm going to actually, I'm going to read 2 quotes, even though I told you I was only reading 1. Booyah. That just happened. Okay. So this is what Judith says. She says, we can divide our organism into 3 levels: matter, energy, and what Judith calls fundamental consciousness. And we can talk about this a little bit more. These are 3 levels of attunement to ourselves. Most people never get to know themselves beyond the level of physical matter. They experience themselves as solid objects, and they experience other people, animals, trees, and so forth as solid objects also. In their relationships, they make contact from the surface of themselves to the surface of others, because a solid object has only a surface. And go. I blended them. Those were 2 quotes blended into one.
And go. I'm like,
and
I feel like
shoot.
The teacher just called on me in the classroom. Judith's work, which is called the realization process, which for those of you who listen regularly know, Vanessa and I just got our certification in doing that work. It has been for me a profoundly helpful way to experience myself as energy. Now, Judith is one of maybe the most practical, most sane, most low drama people I've ever met in my life. Mm-hmm. This woman has no interest in making things mystical or complicated or any of that. She's just profoundly straightforward, and she wants everything to be simple.
Will not hypothesize the way I want her to.
She won't. She doesn't want to get, and I love the way she just does her little hand gesture. We don't have to get into all of that. But when she's saying that, what she's doing in the classroom setting, in this case, is redirecting you to actually just feel what you're experiencing. Now, I can go on for days about how we live in a disembodied culture and what that means, but I'll try to just say the important nugget version, which is, God, it's so frustrating that we have to even explain that bodies matter and that they're alive and that feeling them matters is completely crazy, but true. Because our culture, because we think we're solid objects and we just have a surface. So it's about, what are my outward actions? What did I accomplish today? Did that person I interacted with at work like me or not like me? Is my boss happy with how I'm doing? What's going on for dinner? All those things are real and true and fine. But there's not a lot of diving into ourselves, meaning our bodies, and feeling ourselves. And I don't just mean at the level of emotion. I'm sad today. I'm angry today. All that's fine because that's energy too. But I mean literally feeling sensation. And so there's this whole field of research going on right now that's really exciting on interoception. It's mostly neuroscientists, some neurobiologists who are studying this. And I've had a chance to talk with some of them on liberated body. And so it's really exciting because we have a culture that likes proof. And so here are these people, very, very bright people with a lot of resources to research things, saying, hey, guys, first of all, your body is a thing you can feel. It goes like this, right? Like it's what you were saying with Kieran, that tingly in your hands, or just noticing I feel a dead space in my heart, but then I feel all the squirmy wormies in my solar plexus. And then even super tangible things. My right hip is achy. My left hip, I don't notice anything. Anyway, this process of becoming intimate with feeling yourself on the inside and better mapping your own sensation of yourself on the inside turns out has certain big benefits in the research. It profoundly aids in decreasing depression and anxiety. They're using it with people who are dealing with addiction or eating disorders. And people are having these profound recoveries just by mapping themselves on the inside. So, that's interesting, because we're in a culture that didn't think that was interesting before until we could see proof. It actually changes our lives. And Judith is doing the same thing. Judith happens to be coming from the background of psychology and spirituality and melding those things. But what she's saying is you can become embodied, get in your body, and you can map your sensation on the inside differently. And then one of the things that happens when you really start tuning your dial that way is that you notice it's very lively. It's on the move from the energy level. And then we can talk about what she meant by fundamental consciousness, or what we perceive she meant, because obviously we aren't her. And you can track all these different sensations, and you can track lack of sensation. You can track how that changes over time. It's very practical. It's just a noticing. It's a learned skill, but it's a noticing. And it's the beginning of understanding that your energy, to me, that's the beginning of, it's all just made up of energy. And when you go through, say, Judith's foundational meditation, which is the attunement to fundamental consciousness. And I'll put the link, by the way, for those of you listening, in the show notes to where you can get that audio course on Sounds True, because it has her guided meditations, which are helpful. If you want to attune to fundamental consciousness at home, you can. And what you experience is that not only are you made of energy, but everything's made of energy, and that it's all the same pervasive space. Boom, go.
It was very well said. I had all these thoughts, but then I'd lose them because I was just listening to you. And then, oh my God, I got to respond at the end of this. No, I was thinking, you were saying it's the first time that you experience yourself as energy, right? But also to me, it's like, that's how you experience that you exist, like genuinely exist. So there's this weird thing that I guess, like, when you're buying the experience that you're only matter, it's usually because you're caught up in concept or something, right? It's like you're up in this cognitive realm and disconnecting from the aliveness of the body. I think most typically because the body didn't feel safe, right? We're disconnecting from feelings. We're disconnecting from constrictions. We're disconnecting from our wounds. And so we're this lumpish being because we're not inhabiting the space of our body. So we're not feeling ourselves as alive. We're not feeling connected to that inner realm, that self, really, because I do experience it the most as myself. And then in that case, we feel these weird things, like something's missing, or like we're fake, or like we're not real. And people describe that. I mean, they literally will say those words, something's missing, or they'll wonder, like, why aren't I grateful for things I know cognitively I should be grateful for? And it's like, well, because you're not having an experience, right? You're just not having a direct experience because you're associating with this lumpish matter, and you're not inhabiting yourself in a way that allows you to be in connection with self, other, and the world. So I feel like there's a lot of things about energy work, maybe to differentiate between like matter, energy, and fundamental consciousness a little bit. When we did meditating with the body at Dharma Ocean, there's a meditation in that lineage. It's called the Central Channel Meditation, right? Central Channel. I think it's just so simple as that. The Central Channel Meditation. Now, if some of you are yogis or practicing maybe just different kinds of energy work, have it. But, they'll talk about the Kundalini energy, and they'll talk about Sushumna. Wait.
Sure.
Right.
I'm not well versed in these. I don't know, but
I think we even learned
rings
that.
A bell.
Anyway, it's Sushumna, I think. Anyway, you guys can correct me. So this is what it is. It's talking about the energy that runs up through the center of your body. It's like right in front of the spine. So we're doing this meditation that we're being taught in this course, and the energy was popping. It was intense. The energy comes up from the earth through your pelvic floor, up through your spine, all the way out through the top of your head. And I remember doing that meditation and feeling almost like, not exactly waves, because it did have a bit of a containment, but like rushing energy through a pipe, like a big pipe. Mm-hmm. And I've described this in detail in other episodes we did, like kind of orgasmic, because the energy is like rushing through you. Mm-hmm. And that was the first experience, maybe not my first Kundalini type experience, but the first one I'm remembering like in recent history that I could put words to. And that was big energy. Mm-hmm. So then the first time I started working with Judith, I think it was in her telecourse or in my private session with her, I can't remember. I was describing that level of energy was happening as I was doing her meditations. It was like a rushing. I always feel like almost like sheets of energy going up and down and moving left and right. And she was saying, no, that's energy. Now go subtler. And that's fundamental consciousness.
Right. It has that's the stillness that every spiritual tradition points to. Go to the stillness.
Yeah. And Judith makes this point, if you're practicing, let's say Buddhism, Zen Buddhism, where they talk a lot about emptiness, in these kinds of traditions, that stillness can be felt as emptiness, mm-hmm. or it can be felt as aliveness. And it's this alive quality, this vibrational quality. Jeannie Zandi talked about it, like following the vibrational moment. Everyone talks about it in their own different language. But so then Judith had me attuned to this much more subtle thread-like energy in the same area, in that same central channel. And like, you don't pull it up, you don't image it, you don't fantasize, you don't do anything. You just open your channels and it's there. It's right there. And then it's very subtle. And that's that kind of like vibrational, pervasive energy that is in me, is in you, is in the walls. And so I think it's interesting that there's these like, I don't know if other people probably divide them differently. I know yoga has doshas, but Judith said matter, energy, fundamental consciousness. And they're different.
Mm-hmm. If we want to demystify something, I don't know, but I think when people are describing visiting other realms, if we want to demystify that, we're talking about this. Being able to feel it. I do. And I mean, I do. Doesn't mean it's true. Doesn't like in some kind of factual way. Doesn't mean jack shit. It just means.
Unlike Judith, that's what I think. Hypothesize.
Exactly. And actually, I remember hearing Christian Kirk talk about this, and I will put a link up to a YouTube video of her talking about this, because that was the beginning of me starting to go, oh, it's not woo-woo, it's not wacky. And I'm sure that it is too, right? For plenty of people. My experience, because I'm not inclined that way, I'm not interested in sort of whatever, like celestial beings. It's just not my jam. But I do love, I'm kinesthetic, so sensation makes sense to me. And it's saved my life, because I spent the first half of my life completely ignoring my very unpleasant body. So coming home to it has been this very delightful and long process. And that kind of subtlety of different kind of sensations, or even the level of the thinking mind might be considered a realm. And then the level of feeling the energy moving in your body might be considered a realm. And it doesn't really matter, because who cares about these words? But I just think that it's all pointing at experience. It's all pointing at different kinds of experiences and different kinds of things that we can tune into. And so then I guess that the interesting question is, who cares? Why?
Yeah, I have that.
So then what? So then what do you do with that?
Mm-hmm.
My experience is that when I do that, when I attune to both the energy in my system and fundamental consciousness, my life changes. And I was actually talking with a client the other day who's a body worker, which I love, because body analogies are, for me, a very clear way to understand how life works, and she was saying to me, I feel like my job as a body worker, and a lot of us out there who do manual therapy and body work feel this way. My job is just to make space in the body, and then the body heals itself. And I said, exactly. So whatever you want to call it, meditation, attuning to fundamental consciousness, energy work, I can use those words interchangeably. That's making the space, and then your life heals itself. It's like unclogging plumbing of a house. Then things just flow better. And Kieran's recent course, which we're just finishing, Accelerated Healing, she does a series of courses through the year that each build on each other. It has been so profoundly helpful for me for making energy work and doing energy work on myself completely uncomplicated, because I'm paying attention to the moving part that you were saying, you were explaining to Judith, and Judith points out, yes, that's energy. And I can find all these constrictions. It's literally like constrictions in hoses. Some places are completely numbed and deadened off. Some are twisted really tight. Some are bursting over full with energy and they can't move. And I feel all of these, and we all do actually. So it's just a matter of gaining that facility. But it's just like a feeling like right now I'm excited to be having this conversation. And so I feel a lot of energy in my heart, and it's moving up into the base of my throat. That's just because right now I'm having an experience of talking about something that I'm really excited about. That's what that energy feels like. But then I can also find these very habitual patterns of ways that I constricted myself over time. And Judith talks about those as being patterns that are fascial as well. Just the way that we all kind of carry ourselves, the way that, one person's heart is collapsed in a certain way, and one person's jaw is retracted in a certain way, or just the right eye kind of winces all the time, or whatever. We all have our own body signatures. That's a part of that. And so tuning into it and helping to bring some spaciousness and ease to that movement by meditating on it, sitting with it, feeling it, and sort of tracking it, it changes the constrictions, and then it changes this is the part that sounds woo unless you have an experience of it. And then life changes. P.S. That part happens. So that's what, healing matters because it's healing, I guess is the bullet point there.
Is that our title?
Healing matters because it's healing.
I was thinking when I used to teach at Chinese medicine school, I always used to say emotions are energy. They're energy in motion. That's what they are. And we call them feelings because, we feel them. They're in the body, right? And, when I first learned John Wellwood's work, which is similar to the kind of stuff Kieran did with us, hers is just like next level nuance. So you could do it with yourself. But it was like, on the basic level, what was similar was you just made space, right, for the experience. You sat with the emotions. And then what you found was on this energy level, not on the fundamental consciousness level with constrictions, but on the energy level, energy would move. So this big, overwhelming feeling you might have been having, like intense grief, as soon as you made space for it and attuned to it, it would move. Mm-hmm. And then actually almost all of the time, people found this place of peace, right? Because what they were doing was contacting stillness. And by contacting stillness, the emotion had space, energy moves, and they would find this sense of peace. And it was so interesting to me because it's like we're so afraid of our emotions, right? We've been so afraid that our whole movement has been, let me not feel it, which, makes sense in a certain regard because when you're a child and you're in an environment or a situation or a circumstance that you can't handle, you don't feel you can handle, but you also can't leave, because you're a powerless little being, then you're not going to feel all your feelings, right? You're going to try to put a lock on some of them.
Right. It's a very handy thing to do.
Pretty handy, pretty good. And then that becomes a habit for us. And we keep associating feeling our feelings as what's going to overwhelm us. It's going to take us down. It's going to, tear us apart. but actually they're energy, and they're energy in motion. And most of them, if you attune to it, will move. And then we have these deeper constrictions, these kinds of real core wounds that takes a much more, I guess it takes much more attention and time to actually get that energy to open up. But it's the same.
Mm-hmm.
Find stillness, hold it, and it moves eventually.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about that. And then I was thinking about, and this is kind of like a hypothesis. So let's see what you think about this. So thinking about what Judith had said in that quote about matter, and most people associate themselves with matter, and I'm thinking, well, part of why that's problematic is most humans are afraid to die. And when you perceive yourself as only matter, you look at what happens to matter in the world, and matter gets destroyed, right? Like it doesn't, you can break apart a boat and it doesn't keep the same shape. You can crush a rock and it doesn't keep the same shape. And if I'm only matter, then what will become of me? And that can be a really scary thing that can live in the background of someone's consciousness. There was a great book, I think it was like Ernest Becker, called Fear of Death, Fear of Dying. And it's like all about how that's the fear that's driving everything. Well, if all you feel yourself as is matter, that's quite real that fear exists for us. Now, the other part of my hypothesis is that there's some people who, in a way, don't experience themselves as matter at all. Like, in a way, even if they're not thinking like this, they're floating. They're in the ethereal fields, they're in the energetic realms, and they almost have a distaste for experiencing themselves as matter. Again, none of this conscious. So I'm thinking about, like, when I was so dissociative, through doing all of this work we've been doing in the last couple of years, I've come to realize how energetic a being I am. So I never really thought of before, but I've come to see how much I'm dancing in the energy realms. Like, I love imagery and I love energetic big sensations, and I'm always floating in the field of energy to feel other people's energy, and like all of those things that I'm prone to. And you realize that Judith talks about it in the book Belonging Here, that a lot of spiritually sensitive people, as she calls them, or senseys as we've been calling them, have these habits of kind of floating around in the energy realm because it's safer than being in the body where these traumas exist. And so I sort of get the sense, and this is where I'm hypothesizing, kind of asking a question, that people can either really associate as matter, and that's one sort of dilemma, or keep trying to move towards energy and escaping matter and escaping the body and escaping the earth, and then be in that dilemma. Does that make sense to you?
Totally. And you know what it makes me think of from my world as a manual and movement therapist, primarily for a long time now? You can see where people are on this broad continuum between those 2 points based on their movement signature in the world.
No way.
Oh, totally. So it's not like this person would ever listen. The principal of my son's school, every time I see him, because, it's like school pickup drop off, I get to see him walk across parking lots where he doesn't know he's being seen a lot. This guy thinks he's matter. He is the most lumpish walker ever. Nicest guy, such a nice guy. I don't know anything about his story other than what a nice principal. But I know he thinks he's a lump because of the way he moves. It is so effortful. He is so made of separate parts stuck together in his mental construct of himself. And so that's how he's experiencing the world, it's how he's moving in the world. The super ethereal people do have this. I mean, first of all, they've got the diffuse eyes, right? Like the spaced out eyes. And then they just have this kind of floaty way. And then maybe if we're going to pick a person who's just like landed, nailing it right solid in the middle, someone like Thich Nhat Hanh, watch that guy walk across a room and you see somebody who is landed. They are fully form and fully formless at the exact same time. And watching the movement signatures is fascinating that way. And actually, I think Judith and I talked about that in the interview too, just that or we talked about it sort of from a different level. The shapes we make, we often think it's about, well, I injured my left shoulder because I used to be a baseball pitcher or whatever. That's true. But so much and so that's why I'm collapsed on this left side or whatever the story is. But so much of the way we move through the world and carry ourselves and hold ourselves is about what we believe to be true about ourselves and our lives and the world. And then our body is formed around what those belief systems are. So I love watching movement signatures. It's one of my great delights. I'm not one of those annoying people. Everyone's always like, can you tell what's wrong with me? I'm like, no, because you're freaking perfect. I don't spend my time. It's not an analyzing. It's more just this fascinating noticing.
Yeah, it's a noticing. That's funny. I get that too, because, anytime you work with people are thinking you're looking at them very carefully, and you are. But you're not analyzing it. Like you don't.
No, it's not what's wrong. With that? Well, yeah, the whole time we were having tea, I was thinking about how your right shoulder is lower than your left shoulder. No, I don't see people that way at all.
No, you notice it though. That's just part of what happens.
I think that the signature of how you move and how you carry yourself, and how that's a direct correlation to what you believe to be true about yourself and the world, that's endlessly fascinating.
It is fascinating. And on every level, as you said, we can look at it from the level of energy. We can look at it from our pain bodies showing up in the way that we hold ourselves. And it's just, it's endlessly fascinating to me too. I guess circling back to the why for a second, like why do you do it? So, yeah, I've spoken about it before, doing some of Judith's meditations. Because Judith works so much with energy, there's other ways that teachers access you to stillness, like help you find your way to stillness. But because she's working so much with energy, it's clear to talk about. But when I land in my body, when I recognize myself as fundamental consciousness and I can attune to that, then you feel whole. Mm-hmm. Which is this interesting thing we all want.
And really supported within yourself and supported everywhere in the environment as well.
Yeah. And this sense, like the word's comfortable in your skin, you know how that's what we want? Mm-hmm. Like we don't want to feel anxious. Like if y'all can like feel the energy of anxiety, it kind of rises up.
Yeah. And pushes out. It travels into the future because you're trying to predict calamity.
Right. And sometimes I feel like anxiety pushes up and towards people, right? As you're trying to read them and is everything okay? It's like, but it's always up and out. It's like away from yourself. Mm-hmm. And so when we have those kinds of experiences, what we want to feel is like comfortable in our own skin. And that's what starting to learn to attune to yourself as energy and then fundamental consciousness can really offer, right? And I like the way Judith said something like when you're tuned into fundamental consciousness, it's a very subtle vibration and it may feel like champagne, like just these like little, effervescence. And I was thinking when you were talking about noticing people's energy signatures, like their movement signatures, and that I was listening to the Jeannie Zandi interview on Buddha at the gas pump. And she was talking about that same thing, like feeling that really like clear vibrational moment. Like that's the decision to make. That actually it's not complicated. If you're meditating or if you want to experience oneness or maybe awakening, if we could use that word, that it's actually not complicated. Find that vibrational moment. Mm-hmm. And then she went on to say more that if you want to know if the teachers kind of got it or not, or anyone who's speaking the spiritual lingo has got it, that it's pretty clear because they have an energetic signature.
Right.
There's a vibration and we all feel it. And so that's the other thing that I think is the why, is that when we're capable of attuning to ourselves as energy, as fundamental consciousness, we're also more aware of the truth around us and the truth within us.
So helpful.
So helpful. Like, do you know, I don't know, I read a study once and they were talking about women and how women can get into a lot of trouble with strangers because we have this like override mechanism in our mind, like in our narratives that says we have to be polite.
Yes.
So that even if you get that
children
first
too.
hit, yes.
Like, I say that to my son a lot. I'm like, if you ever feel like you're in danger, politeness means jack shit. You do everything you can to get attention and get to safety because kids are trained. Be polite to grown-ups.
Yes. Yes. Share, be kind. There's all of these things. And that's, I think women are indoctrinated to that, right? Like we have to be kind,
to be the nice ones.
And so we override what is our intuition, and our intuition is a felt experience of these subtle vibrational fields and how they interact with our subtle vibrational field. I mean, I think in a lot of ways, that's a lot of what intuition is.
Yeah.
And so when we can learn to attune to that level of reality, we start to attune to like what's right for us. We start to attune to if someone is someone that we want to be in contact with or date or marry. And that opens up, you know, as you were saying before, and then your life changes.
Right, exactly, because you're having an opportunity to experience the world differently. So again, it's not woo-woo. It's not magic wand. It's that if I believe I'm a lump, and if I believe that I have to be polite, and if I believe I have to like I don't have a husband or a husband who has a boss, but my husband's a boss. I have to like him. I have to be nice to him at work events. I don't get a chance to tune into the fact that this guy is a fucking con artist. And I do not like him. And I don't get to have an honest conversation with my husband about, I don't trust this guy. Now, if I do get to have that opportunity, maybe that leads the whole family pod into a different stream where you have a job that's not a creepy con artist is holding the purse strings of your whole family life. You know, like that just opens up this opportunity for a completely different and fresher experience. But if you don't tune to your internal bullshit detector, if you don't have an experience of the truth of what you're feeling in any given moment, none of those things get to arise. And then, of course, I just want to say, because I think it's important to say, we have cultural values that are not true values. And so sometimes we get into trouble because somebody, like charisma, right? Like we value extroverts with a lot of charisma. So sometimes we can decide, oh, this feels good because it feels like what my culture says is good. But that person's just projecting an energetic signature that the culture said is good, but underneath it, they're not good. Or we have a value about fearlessness. And so sometimes we can be attracted to sociopaths. Not me. Just kidding. I've been there. Because it's like, ooh, I feel scared all the time and anxious and second guessing myself. But this person, they're totally unflappable. No, they're not afraid of anything. It's like, because they're dead inside.
And they're love bombing me.
And they're love bombing me. So it feels like adrenaline. It feels like it's so exciting and it's so alive. So we have to be aware of that too. You know, that sometimes we've been taught to value things that are not true. But if you're really tuning to your own truth meter, you'll get underneath that and you'll feel, oh, this really excited feeling feels quite a lot like panic and anxiety. That's interesting. You know, I just want to say that.
Well,
it's important.
And the more that you unravel some of your constrictions, I think the more access you have to it.
Yes. And your beliefs about yourself and the world.
Yeah. And your beliefs. Because I feel like that sometimes I used to think about this with like couples and imago therapy and how we're attracted to who we're attracted to, that sometimes it's almost like that energetic signature of how the two of you relate is just familiar.
Yes, right.
Like not good.
No, yeah, it's not a good idea. It's just, I know this. Yes, I'll pick this one out of the grab bag.
Familiar. Yeah. And that certain kind of vibration is like, oh, this feels like home. This feels like what love felt like when I was told this was love in my family of origin. And so there's this certain way that we're like, okay, you know, this vibration's my normal vibration. And it's like, no. And that's where I think it can become confusing when you're like starting to look at vibrations. It's like, no, but this is very good. It's very exciting. And it's like, no, what's really happening in that case is your pain body is feasting. It's like Uber, like I'm home at last doing my thing. And it feels all very familiar and the vibration is familiar, not necessarily healthy or desirable. So there is a lot of subtlety to this. You know, it's like, it's not a perfect art. The more that you're self-aware, the greater your interoception is, the more you heal some of these constrictions, I think the more apparent those little subtle levels of differentiation become. Yeah. But start practicing now, because you're just going to get better with it then.
Right. It's just a learned skill like anything. And you just keep, what was Kieran saying about the surfing analogy? Just, get on the board, paddle back out, wipe out, get back on the board, paddle back out. I love Kieran. She's so clear with her analogies. So it's like, yeah, you're going to wipe out and then you paddle back out. The end.
And this was the other thing I was thinking about for the people who are the dancers in energy realms. It's like when I first started training as a psychologist, I was always exhausted after clients, always wiped out. And I was seeing 5 a week or something. And I was exhausted. And I don't know why I did this, but I sat and thought about what is it that I'm doing when I'm in the room with someone? How am I interacting with them? Because I was actually aware of energy at the time. I was doing a ton of energy work. I've had some amazing energy workers in my life that were so helpful. And I was thinking about on an energetic level, what am I doing that's wiping me out? I've always been told I'm an absorber by every energy worker I've ever talked to. But what I could see in my mind's eye, the image I got was that I was diving into people's bodies and sorting around to find kind of the root so I could help them get there faster and give them this treasure that was within them. And I realized at that time, well, of course, I can't keep leaving my body like that. No wonder I'm exhausted. Mm-hmm. Not to mention it's probably super invasive. I'm not sure. No one necessarily told me they felt bad about it, but I have an idea that it might be. So I think that for those of you who are listening, who are the senseys in the group, who are the empaths, and that there's extra importance on starting to understand energy dynamics, because most of us are engaging at energetic levels. I mean, probably everyone is, because we're all energy
whether we
beings.
know it or not. We are. Yeah.
But in this case, you're tripping out on them. And a lot of your defense mechanisms are energetic defenses. Leaving your body, going up, meditating only in your heart, and then opening to the world. It's the subtle nuance that I got in working with Judith is this codependence, right? Let's talk about the pattern of codependence I've described having with my family. I can be very enmeshed. Mm-hmm. Well, the energetic signature of that is I don't have skin over my body. Mm-hmm. And I just open from the front and pour out towards people.
Yeah.
And that's my safety pattern. I do it because then I can read everybody in the room if I want to. I don't actually always read people, but if I want to, I can. I can catch every nuance, and I'm always giving. And doesn't everybody love someone who's always giving? And I'm always available. Doesn't everybody love that? Doesn't everyone feel cozier? And so that was the way that I energetically learned to move, to flow, to find safety. But as long as I keep doing that, I don't get a sense that I have space to exist. I don't get a sense that I can have boundaries. I don't get a sense of what it feels like to be Vanessa-ing in the world.
You're robbing people of the faith in them that they're going to do a great job at themselves.
Yes. And then there's the implication.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So for that, if any of you are relating to that, I have a secret fantasy. Someday Brooke and I will work with this with people. But
yes, we have a very, between the two of us, not at all secret fantasy that we want to do that.
So I don't know, bear that in mind. But until that point, I would recommend Judith's book, Belonging Here. I think it's really useful.
Yeah, I think it's the best resource out there for that.
Thanks for listening to today's show. The show notes, including any resources we mentioned, live at blissandgrit.com. If you go to the website, just go ahead and scroll down and you'll see each separate episode post, and the resources are right in there. You can also come hang with us on social media. There are some lively conversations happening on Instagram and Facebook, and we're Bliss and Grit at both of those spots. If you want to support the show, you can write us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or on our Facebook page, which again is Bliss and Grit. We also have a new subscribe form on the website at blissandgrit.com, and you can sign up there to be in the know about some of the goodies we have brewing for this community. We so love hearing from all of you, and your reviews help other people find the show. So if technology isn't your thing, but you're enjoying it, well then, telling your friends is something special you can do for us. Huge gratitude to all of you who've written reviews already. Just want to take a second to read one from Laurel Robinson Leahy. A beautiful, relevant, and raw podcast which hits intellectually on very important topics with consciousness. The podcast is true to the name, Bliss and Grit, with the grit being a touch of anger. I wish there were less, quote-unquote, fucks. When you live in a world with few fucks, they seem somewhat violent when you hear them. That being said, do not miss it. Just don't listen when your kids are around, in public, or if you get offended easily by words. I love the topics and the depth at which they are hit upon. The knowledge and self-work of the podcasters is evident, and their presentation provides useful tools for introspection. Thanks so much, Laurel. I love this review. You saw me comment to you on Facebook about it. Thanks so much to all of you who've left reviews and just all of you who are listening. Remember, we will be gone for 2 weeks after this, but we will be back again real soon.